The early Houston morning buzzed with its usual symphony of hums and honks, the air thick with the heady promise of another sweltering day. In the quiet, well-kept neighborhood of Willow Creek Lane, life moved predictably. Lawn sprinklers whirred in sync, delivery trucks rattled past at set times, and neighbors offered each other the same familiar nods from behind steaming coffee mugs. It was, by all accounts, an ordinary place, or so everyone thought. No one suspected that within this sleepy slice of suburbia, a master thief operated under their noses. A thief so unexpected, so astonishing, that when the first whispers started, most neighbors shook their heads and laughed it off. "Maybe the wind blew it away," said Mr. Greaves, the retired Navy man, after losing a delivery of socks and vitamins. "Probably teenagers playing pranks," grumbled Mrs. Langston, the fierce president of the WA, after her box of hand-painted mugs vanished without a trace. But nothing explained the strange patterns, the missing packages, the faint scratches left on doorsteps, or the tiny trails that ended abruptly in the middle of driveways as if the earth itself swallowed the goods. Nothing, until one fateful morning, when Mrs. Diane Bellows, a spry widow who lived in a blue bungalow at the end of the street, decided to set up a surveillance camera. Mrs. Bellows had lost not one, not two, but 3 packages in the span of a month: knitting supplies, a mystery novel collection, and a prized box of lemon shortbread cookies she had ordered from Scotland. Enough was enough. "I'll catch the hooligan red-handed," she muttered, setting the tiny black device above her door, its tiny red eye blinking into the darkness. 3 nights passed without incident. Mrs. Bellows grew restless. She grumbled to her cat, Sprinkles, as they watched hours of perfectly uneventful footage together. Just the paperboy, the garbage trucks, the sleepy yawn of the street lamps turning off at dawn. And then, on the 4th night, something happened. Something so unbelievable that when Mrs. Bellows gasped aloud, she startled Sprinkles into knocking over an entire cup of tea. The grainy footage flickered. There, at 3:47 a.m., a shadow darted into view. It was small, no larger than a football, with a bounce to its step and something gripped tightly between its tiny teeth. Mrs. Bellows squinted closer. A dog, trotting proudly across the concrete like a king surveying his domain, a bubble-wrapped package clutched in his jaws. Mrs. Bellows froze the footage, leaned so close her glasses slid down her nose, and pressed play again. The little creature paused midway down the driveway, ears perked, glancing left and right as if checking for witnesses. Then, in a remarkable feat of determination, he adjusted his grip on the package, a box nearly half his size, and shuffled backward, dragging it across the cement like a miniature sled dog. For a moment, it was almost comical. His tiny paws scrambled. His fluffy white tail, a proud plume, wagged fiercely. Inch by inch, he pulled the parcel out of frame. Where did he go? Mrs. Bellows rewound the tape, following the dog's path frame by frame. At the end of the driveway, the dog darted left toward the fence line, toward a little stucco house 2 doors down, the one with the red door and overgrown bougainvillea vines. The Ramirez house. Mrs. Bellows covered her mouth, smothering a shriek of excitement. She knew the Ramirez family, at least by reputation. Young couple, recently moved in, with a little daughter who always wore pink tutus, and, yes, a small dog. She had seen it in passing. A fluffy little thing with button eyes and a nose that wiggled constantly, as if sniffing out secrets. The culprit was no masked intruder, no professional thief. It was a dog. But what dog would steal packages? And more importantly, why? The next morning, Mrs. Bellows stormed across Willow Creek Lane, armed with her laptop and a righteous sense of purpose. She didn't even bother to leash Sprinkles, who padded behind her curiously. The neighbors watched from behind curtains and bushes, murmuring. Mrs. Bellows knocked sharply on the red door. It swung open a moment later to reveal Mrs. Ramirez, a petite woman with curly dark hair and a baby balanced expertly on her hip. "Good morning, Mrs. Bellows," she chirped brightly. "Good morning, indeed," Mrs. Bellows said, planting her foot on the doorstep and thrusting the laptop forward. "Do you have a few minutes to discuss your dog?" Mrs. Ramirez blinked in confusion. From somewhere inside the house, a bark echoed, sharp, insistent, excited. Mrs. Bellows jabbed a finger at the paused footage of the small dog dragging her Scottish shortbread cookies into the night. Because, my dear, it seems we have a very serious situation. The Ramirez living room was warm and chaotic. Children's toys littered the floor. The scent of coffee mingled with something savory, perhaps a breakfast scramble still warm on the stove. And in the center of it all sat the criminal mastermind himself. A dog no larger than a carry-on suitcase. His fur was a soft, curly mix of cream and tan, his snout slightly smooshed, giving him a permanent expression of joyful confusion. His tongue lolled happily as he trotted over to Mrs. Bellows and promptly tried to climb into her lap. "This," Mrs. Ramirez said sheepishly, scooping him up, "is Bongo." "Bongo," Mrs. Bellows said sternly, "you, young man, are a thief." Bongo wagged his tail furiously, clearly unbothered by the accusation. Mrs. Ramirez shook her head. "I can't believe it. I mean, he's mischievous, sure. He's chewed through his fair share of socks. But stealing packages?" Mrs. Bellows recounted everything. The missing items, the faint paw prints, the surveillance footage. She showed the video 3 times. Each time, Bongo barked excitedly at his own fuzzy image. Mr. Ramirez was called in from the backyard, a rake in hand, wiping sweat from his forehead. He watched the footage and laughed until tears streamed down his face. "I guess we have a little porch pirate on our hands," he said between wheezes. Mrs. Bellows was less amused. "This is serious. He could get into something dangerous. What if he stole a box of medicine? Or something sharp?" Mrs. Ramirez nodded solemnly. "You're absolutely right." Together, they devised a plan. First, they would search the Ramirez property, see how much Bongo had already hoarded. Second, they would return everything to its rightful owners. And third was more complicated. Because as they would soon find out, Bongo's crimes were only the beginning. There was a reason for his stealing. A reason far stranger and more dangerous than anyone could have guessed. The search began that same afternoon. Mrs. Bellows, the Ramirez family, and a few curious neighbors, including Mr. Greaves and Mrs. Langston, gathered in the Ramirez backyard, armed with gloves, garbage bags, and the burning desire to discover what treasures Bongo had pilfered. The backyard itself was a sprawling maze of overgrown shrubs, flower beds gone wild, and a rickety shed that leaned precariously to one side. Vines curled over everything, particularly the monstrous bougainvillea that had swallowed the left fence whole in a riot of pink and green. "This place is a jungle," muttered Mrs. Langston, stepping daintily over a cracked garden gnome. Bongo, oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, bounded happily through the chaos, barking and wagging his tail. Occasionally, he would dart to a specific patch of earth, sniff enthusiastically, and scratch at the ground as if inviting them to see his work. And oh, what work it was! Within the first hour, they unearthed Mrs. Langston's missing box of mugs, each one delicately shattered. Mr. Greaves' socks, chewed but salvageable. A collection of dog toys no one claimed. A heavily slobbered novel, Murder on the Orient Express, ironic, Mrs. Bellows noted. A sealed box of protein bars. And, inexplicably, a child's plastic tiara. They laid the items out on an old picnic table like archaeological relics, marveling at Bongo's impressive, if puzzling, haul. But Mrs. Bellows couldn't shake a nagging feeling. There was something else. Something Bongo hadn't shown them yet. Something important. "Look there," shouted Mr. Greaves suddenly, pointing toward the old shed. Its door was slightly ajar, the lock hanging uselessly from a single rusty nail. Bongo bolted toward it like a shot. The group exchanged wary glances. Mrs. Ramirez picked up a rake, brandishing it like a sword. "After you," Mrs. Bellows said, nudging Mr. Greaves forward. The old Navy man puffed up his chest and marched to the shed, giving the door a mighty shove. It creaked open with a groan, revealing shadows and dust motes swirling in the thick air. And in the far corner, partially hidden beneath a tattered tarp, sat a mound of objects so bizarre that the whole group gasped. There were packages, yes, but also a stack of worn notebooks, crumpled blueprints of houses and streets, old walkie-talkies, a small, battered metal box with a keyhole. "What in the world?" Mrs. Bellows whispered, stepping inside. Bongo barked furiously, tugging at her pant leg. His eyes, usually so carefree, now shimmered with urgency. Mrs. Bellows crouched beside the metal box, brushing aside dust. The keyhole was tiny and corroded, but the box itself felt heavy, solid. Something important was inside. Mrs. Ramirez knelt beside her, frowning. "This doesn't belong to us. They never seen this stuff before." Mr. Ramirez joined them, picking up one of the crumpled blueprints. He spread it open against the wall. It was a detailed map of Willow Creek Lane, their neighborhood, but with strange red X's marked on several houses. One of them was Mrs. Bellow's home. Another was the Ramirez house. A third was an empty lot at the far end of the street. "What the devil is this?" Mr. Greaves muttered. A chill prickled the back of Mrs. Bellow's neck. She stared at the X's, her mind racing. What was someone planning? Why target these homes? And more importantly, who? As they sifted through the pile, a pattern began to emerge. All the packages Bongo had stolen, they hadn't been random at all. They had been meant for those marked houses. Carefully, systematically. Deliveries scheduled and intercepted. Bongo wasn't just stealing for fun, Mrs. Bellows realized aloud. He was protecting us. Mrs. Ramirez stared at her. Protecting us from what? Before Mrs. Bellows could answer, a low growl rumbled from Bongo's throat. He stood at the shed's threshold, fur bristling, ears flat against his head. Following his gaze, Mrs. Bellows saw two figures across the street. Men in dark jackets, sunglasses despite the fading evening light. They leaned against a black van, pretending to fiddle with their phones, but their heads were tilted slightly toward the Ramirez house. Watching, waiting. The same van, Mrs. Bellows realized with a jolt, that she had seen cruising past the street for the past few weeks. Always slow, always silent. Bongo barked again, urgent, loud. "We need to get inside. Now," Mrs. Bellows hissed. The group scattered, ducking into the Ramirez house, clutching the metal box and the blueprints. Inside, Mrs. Bellows peered through the curtains. The men across the street were talking animatedly now, gesturing toward the house. One of them pulled out a walkie-talkie. Mrs. Bellows' heart thudded painfully against her ribs. Something was happening, something big, and somehow, their only clue was locked inside that battered little metal box. That night, Willow Creek Lane felt different. The crickets still sang, the warm breeze still rattled the leaves, but an invisible weight hung over everything. Inside the Ramirez home, an emergency meeting had been convened. Present were Mrs. Bellows, armed with a notebook and pen. Mr. and Mrs. Ramirez, anxious but determined. Mr. Greaves, his Navy instincts kicking in. Mrs. Langston, clutching a mug of tea with trembling hands. And, of course, Bongo, seated proudly in the center of the room, as if he had called the meeting himself. The metal box sat on the coffee table between them, its keyhole gleaming menacingly. "How do we open it?" Mrs. Ramirez whispered. Mrs. Bellows chewed her lip. "Maybe we can find the key somewhere in that shed?" Bongo barked once, sharp and decisive. "You know where it is, don't you?" Mrs. Bellows said, peering into his bright eyes. Bongo wagged his tail furiously, then darted toward the back door, turning to bark impatiently when no one followed. "Well," said Mr. Greaves, standing up with a groan, "when your commanding officer is a dog, you don't argue." The group, tense and fearful, followed Bongo into the night. In the backyard, Bongo led them past the shed, past the flower beds, and right to the tangled mass of bougainvillea. He pawed at the ground furiously until Mr. Ramirez pulled aside a chunk of vines, revealing a small hollow space. Nestled inside, wrapped in an oily cloth, was a tiny golden key. Mrs. Bellows plucked it out carefully, brushing dirt from the intricate designs etched into its surface. "The key to the mystery," she said softly. Bongo barked once in agreement. They hurried back inside, locking the doors and dimming the lights. Mrs. Bellows fitted the key into the box's lock. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that seems to stretch for miles. Then, click. The box creaked open. Inside, they found a USB flash drive. A set of photos showing various houses on Willow Creek Lane. A thick stack of documents marked confidential. Mrs. Bellows pulled out the photos first, shuffling through them with growing horror. Each photo showed a house, but not as it was now. These were staged, empty, sterile. No signs of life. No mailboxes, no kids' bikes scattered on the lawns. Just cold, clinical shots. Blueprints for something. Mrs. Ramirez picked up the documents. Her eyes widened as she read aloud. Subject: Phase 1 Acquisition. Priority Targets: Willow Creek Lane. Timeline: 2 months. Objective: Clear and secure properties without raising public suspicion. The room fell into stunned silence. Mrs. Bellows looked up, her voice shaking. They're not just spying on us, she said. They're planning to take over the neighborhood. And Bongo, sweet, mischievous Bongo, had stumbled onto their plan by accident. Or maybe, just maybe, he knew all along. The room seemed to tilt slightly as Mrs. Bellows finished reading the confidential documents aloud. The words hung in the air like smoke. Phase 1 Acquisition. Clear and secure properties. Without raising public suspicion. Mrs. Langston clutched the arm of the sofa, her knuckles white. They're trying to force us out? She whispered. Mr. Ramirez nodded grimly, flipping through the pages. Buying up homes. Quietly. Making the neighborhood look abandoned. Devaluing property. Creating an excuse to seize the whole street for redevelopment. But why us? Asked Mrs. Ramirez, voice shaking. Mr. Greaves let out a low whistle. It's prime real estate. Close to downtown Houston. Big lots. Someone's looking to turn Willow Creek into luxury condos. Mrs. Bellows stood up sharply. We need proof. Hard proof. Something that can't be swept under the rug. Everyone turned to look at the USB drive lying in the now empty metal box. It felt heavy somehow, even though it weighed almost nothing. This, Mrs. Bellows said, is our bombshell. But even as she spoke, there was a knock at the front door. A loud, deliberate knock. The room froze. Mrs. Ramirez crept to the peephole and gasped. It's them. The men from the van. Mr. Ramirez's hand tightened around the rake he still carried. Mrs. Bellows acted fast. She stuffed the documents and the USB into a canvas tote bag and slung it over her shoulder. She turned to Bongo, who sat by her feet, ears perked and eyes shining with fierce intelligence. You started this mission, Bongo, she whispered, crouching to ruffle his curly fur. And we're going to finish it. Outside, the knocking grew louder. More insistent. And then the doorknob rattled. They're trying to break in. Mrs. Langston gasped. Without thinking, Mrs. Bellows bolted toward the back door, gesturing for the others to follow. Move, now. Bongo barked sharply and raced ahead, slipping through the cracked open screen door into the backyard. The others spilled out after him just as the front door gave a mighty crash and swung open behind them. The men shouted, low, urgent words they couldn't quite hear over the pounding of their own hearts. In the darkness, Bongo led them like a tiny general, weaving through the garden paths, slipping through holes in fences, leading them away from danger. They stumbled into Mr. Greaves' backyard 2 houses down, panting, wild-eyed. Mrs. Bellows clutched the tote bag to her chest. She had to protect the USB at all costs. What now? Mrs. Ramirez gasped. Mr. Greaves pointed toward the community center a few blocks away, a sturdy building where the neighborhood often gathered for meetings. If we can make it there, he said, they have public Wi-Fi. We can upload everything. Send it to the news. The city council. Everyone. And fast, Mrs. Bellows added grimly, before those thugs catch us. They set off across the backyards, hopping fences, dodging motion sensor lights. Bongo darted ahead like a scout, his small body barely a shadow against the grass. But the men from the van were closing in. They made it halfway when disaster struck. As they scrambled over Mrs. Langston's rosebush fence, Mrs. Bellows stumbled and the tote bag slipped from her shoulder. It hit the ground with a thud. Before she could grab it, one of the men, tall, wiry, wearing a black baseball cap, lunged out of the darkness and snatched it up. Got it, he barked into his walkie-talkie. The second man materialized beside him, blocking their path. Mrs. Bellows' heart sank. All their evidence, everything Bongo had fought for, gone in an instant. The taller man sneered. You're not going anywhere. He turned, lifting the bag triumphantly, just in time for Bongo to launch himself at full speed from the bushes. The tiny dog moved like a missile, a blur of determination. He leapt, teeth bared, and sank them firmly into the man's pant leg. The man yelped, trying to shake Bongo off, but the little dog held fast, growling with the force of a creature 10 times his size. The second man lunged forward, but Mr. Greaves was ready, swinging a hefty garden rake like a baseball bat and catching him squarely in the chest. The man staggered backward, wheezing. Bongo gave an almighty tug, ripping the tote bag free from the first man's grasp. It landed in a puddle, muddy but intact. Mrs. Bellows dashed forward, scooping it up, cradling it like a newborn. "Bongo," she cried. The little dog released the man's pant leg, danced nimbly away from a swatting hand, and bolted back to Mrs. Bellows' side. Together, they ran. The men shouted behind them, but now neighbors were poking their heads out of windows, turning on porch lights. Someone shouted for the police. The men hesitated, cursed, and fled back toward their van. Mrs. Bellows didn't stop running until they reached the community center. Inside, Mr. Ramirez jammed the USB into a public computer. Mrs. Bellows paced furiously as files uploaded. Documents, photos, blueprints, all beamed into the inboxes of news outlets, council members, and even the mayor's office. When the final sent notification pinged, the whole room let out a collective breath. It was done. They had exposed the plot. Thanks to Bongo, the fallout was swift. Within 2 days, the story hit the news. Secret plan to buy out Willow Creek exposed by local residents. And a hero dog. City inspectors descended on the development company behind the plot. Lawsuits piled up. The men in the black van were arrested. And the neighborhood rallied like never before. Willow Creek Lane threw a massive block party. Banners reading, "Thank you, Bongo," fluttered from porch railings. Bongo became a local celebrity. The mayor of Houston himself came to present Bongo with a tiny golden medal, specially engraved, for courage, loyalty, and unstoppable spirit. Bongo, wearing a little bow tie, wagged his tail so hard it looked like he might lift off the ground. Mrs. Bellows beamed proudly. "I always knew," she said, ruffling his fur, "you were no ordinary dog." And as the sun dipped low over Willow Creek Lane, casting everything in golden light, Bongo sat on the picnic table, metal shining, eyes bright, guarding his neighborhood. His job wasn't done, of course. Heroes never rest. Especially heroes with 4 paws, a heart of gold, and a taste for adventure.